All right, we're going to talk about some of this weekend's games coming up on the slate. College football week 4. Now, I've already done like standalone videos for 3 or 4 of the bigger games. You can click back and watch those: Clemson, Florida State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, Ole Miss, 3 or 4 of the sort of games that everybody's talking about. But there's a lot of other games coming up this Saturday that are interesting to me for one reason or another. So I wanted to take some time now and talk about several of these. Yeah, I think I got about 10 of them here, and I'm just going to kind of gloss over each of them and give just kind of some brief thoughts here, or else the video would be an hour long. Also, tonight, there are 2 Power 5 games tonight. Now, they're not marquee matchups, but it's Power 5 college football starting at 7 o'clock. I will be live streaming during those games. So if you want to hang out tonight and watch some college football, come on back to the channel around 7 o'clock tonight, and we'll do that. If you're like me and you have absolutely no life outside of college football and nothing better to do on a Friday night, come hang out. We'll watch a couple of Power 5 games and talk about this weekend's matchups. All right, let's start with Rutgers at Michigan, 12 o'clock on the Big Ten Network. Now, Rutgers is undefeated. I'm not sure how many people know that. Of course, Michigan's undefeated as well. But the reason this game is interesting to me is because this is Michigan's first Power 5 game of the season. For the second year in a row, Michigan's entire non-con slate has been lower classification schools. I'm not knocking them or congratulating them. I'm just stating a fact there. So this is our first chance really to see Michigan against Power 5 competition. And Rutgers is 3-0. And Greg Schiano, although he has yet to really replicate his success at Rutgers that he had during his previous stint there, he's a pretty good coach. They tend to play pretty good defense, and if you look over the last couple of years, they've played Michigan pretty tough. Michigan's a 24-point favorite at home in that one. While I do think Michigan will win the game comfortably, I would actually take Rutgers in the 24 points there. I think it probably ends up being a little bit closer than that. I'm also curious to see what type of offense we see from Michigan. They've been kind of a ground and pound team over the last couple of years with those elite running backs, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. But over the first 3 games of the season, they've really let J.J. McCarthy air it out. He's had some of his best passing games of his career have taken place in the first couple of games this season. Now, I think that's kind of been intentional on the part of Michigan. I think they sort of took their first 3 games as almost like a preseason to work on some things. I think they chose to work on the passing game. I think once we get into conference play with Michigan, we will see them run the ball and run the ball successfully. McCarthy had 3 interceptions last week. Don't want to replicate that today. Got to get that cleaned up. But overall, McCarthy's played pretty well with the exception of those interceptions last week. So I think Michigan wins, but I'll take Rutgers in the points to keep it a little bit closer than that. That's tomorrow at 12 o'clock on the Big Ten Network. Also coming up at noon tomorrow on Fox, Oklahoma at Cincinnati. I think this is going to be a huge home game environment for Cincinnati. Cincinnati is no stranger to huge games against Power 5 teams, even though this is their first year in a Power 5 conference. They played in a Peach Bowl a few years ago against Georgia. Of course, they made the playoffs a couple of years after that. So they've played in big games before, but this is their first chance at home as a Power 5 team to host a big-time Power 5 opponent in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's undefeated. Cincinnati's looked okay this year. In my opinion, they've been a little bit better than what people thought they would be. They've got Emory Jones at quarterback, and you're kind of getting what you would expect from Emory Jones. He had, I think, 7 touchdowns in one game earlier this year. Didn't play that great last week. We'll see. I think the home environment will be electric here for Cincinnati. Oklahoma's a 14-point favorite. I've been impressed with Oklahoma this season, as you might be aware. I've got them ranked pretty high in the Uncle Lou Top 25. I think they came in this week at number 11, which is much higher than they are ranked in either the AP or the coaches. I think Oklahoma goes on the road and handles business here, and I actually think they win by more than 14. Auburn at Texas A&M, one of the most interesting games of the week to me, 12 o'clock ESPN. Sometimes college football games take on an interest outside of just who wins or loses, right? Now, in this case, of course, it matters who wins or loses, but like if Texas A&M loses this game, other than the obvious, which means it would be their second loss of the season, most likely knocking them out of any playoff hopes or dreams that anybody might have had for them, what does that mean for Jimbo Fisher? They've already got kind of embarrassed on the road at Miami a couple of weeks ago, and while I think their offense has played better this year with Bobby Petrino in as offensive coordinator, and I actually like Connor Wegman, I think he's a pretty good quarterback, Taking a second loss in September, I have a feeling would be detrimental to Jimbo Fisher's longevity as head coach at Texas A&M. You feel like if they can't beat Auburn at home this year, a down Auburn team, at least relative to where Auburn is in most years, with a first-year head coach, and I know Hugh Freeze has coached before at Ole Miss and then, at Liberty, and we all know all that. But, his first year at Auburn, sort of a rebuild year, kind of experimental at best at quarterback, where Peyton Thorne transfers in from Michigan State. Robbie Ashford, kind of an athlete that just plays quarterback sometimes. And I don't mean this negatively towards Auburn, right? Auburn's undefeated. I think Auburn is going to get better with Hugh Freeze as head coach, and I think they will be better this year than they were last year. Just by the addition of Hugh Freeze, it's a massive coaching upgrade over Brian Harsin. But because Auburn is in year one of what is looked upon as a rebuild, whereas Jimbo Fisher has been at Texas A&M for what feels like forever now, and never really gotten it out of neutral. I mean, 8 wins has been a good year there for Jimbo at Texas A&M. It does kind of feel like if they can't beat this Auburn team at home, then there's probably a lot more losses on this schedule for Texas A&M down the road, keeping in mind they still play LSU. They still play Alabama, who admittedly is a mess themselves. They still play Ole Miss. This feels like a game that they really need to win if Jimbo Fisher wants to be the head coach at Texas A&M next season. They are favored. They're an 8.5-point favorite, and I do think they find a way to get the win here, but not by 8.5. I'm going to take Auburn and the points. I think this will be a close, low-scoring game. I'm going to take Auburn and the points, but I do think Texas A&M will win. All right, now here's one I'm really excited about out of the Pac-12, and you don't have to stay up till midnight to watch this one either. UCLA on the road at Utah, 3:30 on Fox. Now, a lot of different reasons why this game is interesting. Number one, it looks like Cam Rising may make his return this week at home against Chip Kelly's UCLA team. There's a lot of kind of smoke around that idea that Cam Rising could be playing this week. This is a huge game within the Pac-12, which is kind of part of a broader point when it comes to the Pac-12. I did my best last year, and I'm going to do it again this year. People need to be watching the Pac-12 every single week. I think it's going to be the most exciting conference in all of college football for the second year in a row. There are 5 or 6 teams in the Pac-12 who are legitimate top 25 caliber teams. The only question I have about the Pac-12 as a whole is if any one of those teams are going to be good enough to get through that regular season schedule and then win the Pac-12 title game with 1 or less losses in order to get themselves into the playoffs. Not necessarily sure either UCLA or Utah is a playoff team, but they're both undefeated. Both have hopes of winning the Pac-12. Both have hopes of potentially making a playoff. Chip Kelly has gone with Dante Moore at QB, the 5-star freshman, and he's played okay. And you can't underestimate the impact that getting Cam Rising back would have for Utah. Surprisingly, UCLA has been the better defensive team so far this year. Utah, very well coached, normally has one of the best defenses in the Pac-12, and I think they will again. Washington. We'll see how UCLA holds up over the course of the season. But I expect this to be an interesting game, an exciting game. I'm looking forward to watching this one. I hope Cam Rising comes back. He's one of the most exciting players in college football. I love watching him play. But I picked this one earlier in the week on a different show. I think UCLA gets the win here. I think UCLA is massively underrated and undervalued. And it's not that I don't think Utah is good. I do. This is I think, going to be a theme in the Pac-12. There's going to be good teams that lose in the Pac-12 every single week because they're going to be playing other good teams. I mean, just look at all the matchups or potential matchups in a Pac-12 title game and some of these teams playing the regular season that we've got coming up. But games like Oregon and Southern Cal, Oregon State and Utah, UCLA at Washington. I mean, who would you pick in these games? These games are hard to pick. And we're going to see a lot of these games during the regular season. We're going to have a great Pac-12 championship game at the end. Starts this week, though. I think UCLA knocks off Utah on the road, 3:30 on Fox. UTSA at Tennessee. Now, in the offseason or even 2 weeks ago, I don't think anybody really paid much attention to this game or thought much about it with the kind of really just poor performance, in my opinion, that Tennessee had last week on the road against Florida. I think this becomes a very interesting game, 4 o'clock on the SEC Network. The Vol fans are not happy with the play of quarterback Joe Milton. Look, I'll be the first to admit he hasn't looked great. I'm not sure how much of a surprise that should be, though. We kind of had an idea of who Joe Milton was, and it turns out that's basically what he is. He's not Hendon Hooker. The accuracy is not there. The decision-making is not there. The kind of sort of innate ability to make the big play when it's needed appears not to be there for Joe Milton. Now, is he a terrible quarterback? No. And Tennessee's got some good wide receivers, and they can run the ball. And they should win this game against UTSA, but they're favored by 21.5. I've seen a lot of people taking UTSA in this game. I'm not ready to just sort of roll Tennessee over and start kicking dirt on them yet. I mean, I didn't think they were going to win the East heading into the season. I still don't think they're going to win the East, but I still think Tennessee has the possibility of getting to 9 or 10 wins. For whatever reason, they haven't been playing well on the road lately, even going back to last year. In fact, they've lost 3 of their last 4 road games, but they're a different team at home. They haven't lost at home in a while. And I think Tennessee will win this game by 21.5. I'm not so sure. I wouldn't bet your money on this game, but for the purposes of just making a pick, I'll take Tennessee at home and lay the 21.5 over UTSA. Georgia Tech on the road at Wake Forest, 6:30 on the CW Network. I think this comes on right after Buffy the Vampire Slayer over there on the CW Network. But Wake Forest, a 4-point favorite at home against a Tech team that's starting the season 1-2. I still think Georgia Tech has an outside shot at making a bowl game this year. But this is the type of game they got to win if they want to get there. They had a chance against Louisville. They were up, had a great second quarter, sort of let it get away from them in the second half. The trip to Ole Miss was kind of a loss from the beginning. I don't think very many people gave Georgia Tech a chance in that one last week, and Ole Miss handled their business, pulled away in the end. Covering the spread, winning by more than 3 touchdowns. This feels like a game that Georgia Tech kind of needs to win. Unfortunately, I just don't think they are. I do think Jeff Collins is an upgrade, Brent Key is an upgrade over Jeff Collins, who was just an absolute disaster. I just don't think there's enough talent on this team, and I just don't think Brent Key's been there long enough really to get what he needs out of this team to beat a Wake Forest team on the road. I do think this will be a relatively close game, kind of a one-possession type of deal. 4 points is not that much, though. I'm going to take Wake Forest and lay the 4, say they win by maybe a touchdown. Arkansas at LSU. LSU looked really good last week in a huge win on the road at Mississippi State, winning 41-14. Outside of the second half of that Florida State game, LSU has played pretty well, and I've said it since the minute the Florida State game ended, and I haven't seen anything yet to change my mind. I still think LSU is a really good team. Florida State played out of their minds in the second half of that game. Now, since then, Florida State's been kind of teetering a little, and we'll see what they do this week on the road at Clemson. But I think LSU is a really good team. I still think they're the favorite in my mind to win the SEC West. I think they're the best team in the SEC West right now. At home, 7 o'clock at night, an Arkansas team that doesn't have a whole lot of weapons. I do like KJ Jefferson at quarterback, but I've been saying this for a couple of years now about Arkansas and really Kentucky from the East too. I feel like those two teams kind of peaked out a couple of years ago when they both hit the 8-9 win mark or whatever and were ranked within the top 15 for a couple of weeks during the season, and have kind of regressed back to the norm since then. I think that trend kind of continues this week. I like LSU at home in this spot. I'm going to take Arkansas to keep it closer than 17.5. Maybe they can slow the game down with a running game aided by quarterback KJ Jefferson, and LSU wins by 14. So give me Arkansas on the 17.5 points, but I don't think this will be close, and I think LSU will win. Oregon State on the road at Washington State, another one of these Pac-12 games. These are kind of the last two teams left standing in the Pac-2, right? Everyone else has found another home. Oregon State and Washington State feel like, the one orphan that didn't get picked or whatever, or the two orphans, I guess, that didn't get picked. But both of these teams have played pretty well so far this year. This one comes on 7 o'clock on Fox. Oregon State, of course, has quarterback DJ Uiagalelei. the transfer from Clemson, our old buddy, the ukulele. I think Oregon State wins this game on the road. This is going to be a good game. I know not a lot of people are going to watch it or pay attention to it, and I don't expect either one of these two teams to win the Pac-12 or anything like that. But another, I think, interesting game. And again, there's going to be multiple interesting games in the Pac-12 every single week. I'm going to take Oregon State on the road with the ukulele to get the win on at Washington State, lay to 3 points. UAB at Georgia, not an interesting game at all. UAB is one of the worst teams in the group of five. They're just absolutely horrendous. Trent Dilfer is their head coach. You remember him back from his days on, ESPN, and of course played in the NFL forever. But they're just a terrible team right now. This game's interesting to me only because I'm a Georgia fan. I know not many other people really care about this game. I want to see Georgia play a complete game. I'd like to see Georgia up, 4 touchdowns at halftime in this game. Georgia has done an okay job offensively in terms of moving the ball, total yards, things like that. But the scoring has been down. The red zone scoring in particular has been bad. The field goal kicking has been bad. I'd like to see Carson Beck stretch the field, some downfield throws. I don't have anything against these screen passes and hitch passes, and I understand the philosophy of getting your playmakers the ball in space and that perimeter passing plays can be extensions of the run game. I completely understand all that. But last year, Georgia led the country in explosive plays of 20 yards or more. I don't know where they're at this year, but they're nowhere near the top of the list. They're way closer to the bottom of that list than they are to the top. I would like to see Georgia take some more shots downfield. I would like to see the chemistry improve between Carson Beck and 2 or 3 receivers. It's great to have 9 or 10 receivers that you can rotate in or out, but it just seems hard to develop chemistry with 9 or 10 different wide receivers. Arian Smith only has 1 catch this year. He seems like a pretty obvious deep threat. Ra Thomas, a transfer from Mississippi State, has played better every single week so far this season. I feel like he's a guy that can stretch the field and make some downfield plays for UGA. And Brock Bowers has been off to a slow start, too. Now there's some rumors that he might be battling a little bit of an injury or something like that. And I'm not really concerned about Brock Bowers. We all know what he can do and have seen what he can do for 2 straight years. So I don't have any doubt in him. But it would be nice to see Carson Beck stretch the field a little bit here against a bad UAB team. And for Georgia to sort of put them away early, coast to a big win. The spread is 42.5 or 41.5. I do think if Georgia plays a good first half, they can cover that 41.5. But that's been the problem for Georgia this year. They really have gotten off to slow starts in all of their games. I'd like to see that come to an end this week. I wouldn't actually bet on this game. I don't really see how anybody could be comfortable right now laying this big of a number with Georgia, given their struggles in the red zone. But I do think Georgia has the ability to win this game big, 7:30 on ESPN2. What about Iowa at Penn State? Well, you want to talk about a defensive game here. This might be one of the lowest scoring games of the week. I'm still not a big fan of Iowa. They are undefeated. They're ranked. And as you know, I am extremely high on Penn State and think they have a pretty good shot at potentially winning the Big Ten and making the playoffs this year. We'll see what happens with, of course, Ohio State and Michigan. But Penn State's defense has been absolutely lights out this year. Probably the best defense in the Big Ten, in my opinion, through the first 3 weeks. And, you can point to any one stat or group of stats that you want to try to prove that wrong. Again, I'm not a stats guy. I'm talking about just watching these games. Penn State's defense is the real deal. Iowa's is too. But I trust Penn State at home, and they clearly have a better offense than Iowa. I think Penn State wins this game with Drew Allar at quarterback making just enough plays and the running of Nick Singleton. 14.5. I don't know if I would lay that here. I'd probably take Iowa in the points, but I expect Penn State to win the game. And lastly, Mississippi State on the road at South Carolina. These are 2 teams who both lost last week in kind of different fashions. South Carolina lost to Georgia, but you get the feeling that they kind of come away from that game motivated, proud of themselves. And I thought they played well, particularly in the first half. Now, it fell apart for South Carolina, obviously, in the second half in the Georgia game last week. Georgia just completely shut them down. I think they had 20 yards passing in the second half. Didn't score. Georgia ends up beating them 24-14. But a pretty good showing for South Carolina, especially considering how bad Georgia has blown them out for the last 2 or 3 years in a row. Mississippi State, on the other hand, completely dismantled at home last week by a red-hot LSU team. It feels like South Carolina needs to win this game and win it convincingly. South Carolina is one of those teams that I think at the end of the year, their record might not really reflect how good of a team they are. They've got some tough games, and they're going to struggle to match their win total from last year, which I believe was 8-4 in the regular season. Don't know if they'll get there, but they've looked like a better team so far than Mississippi State. I think Mississippi State might be the second worst team in the SEC behind only Vandy. They're just trying to do a complete flip over there from Mike Leach's air raid offense to more of a conservative, run the ball type of deal. And, they still have Will Rogers at quarterback, and he can still make some plays, but he's gone from throwing 60 passes a game to throwing 20 passes a game. And I don't know, it's looked discombobulated, Mississippi State has this year. And South Carolina can be a tough place to play, especially at night. I like the Gamecocks to bounce back here and win this game and cover the 6 points. There you go. There's some of my thoughts on some of the other games coming up this week. Again, I made standalone videos on several of the bigger games: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, Ole Miss, Clemson, FSU. If you're interested in those or my thoughts on those games, you can click back a couple of videos and check those out. Those are all 10, 15 minutes long where I talk just about those particular games. And again, I will be live streaming tonight at 7 o'clock. There's not one but 2 Power 5 games on tonight. Wisconsin and Purdue and NC State and Virginia, I believe, are the 2 games. Again, not marquee matchups, not great games, but it's Power 5 college football. So if you're going to be home watching some football tonight, or you're looking for something to do, come back over to the channel at 7 o'clock tonight. We'll watch those games, and we'll talk college football. We'll talk about all these big matchups coming up this weekend while we watch those 2 games tonight in prime time. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., the college football kickoff show. I do that every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., sort of get the day started. For college football, we take a look at all the games, the latest numbers, odds, any injury updates, weather-type issues, anything that might be going on that could affect the day's games. We talk about everything from what kind of food we're planning on eating that day to upset picks to locks of the week, you name it. The rigged wheel at the end of the show where we try to give some money away. We have a really good time, the college football kickoff show every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And then my live streaming schedule for tomorrow for the games, I'm going to be live streaming on YouTube during all the noon games. So we'll go live right at noon. We'll hang out. We'll watch all the noon games. That'll be on Patreon, not YouTube. That'll be on Patreon. So those of you who are members of the Patreon page, you know the deal. About 11:45, there'll be a link posted on the Patreon page. Just go to Patreon, click that link. It'll take you to the live stream. If you want to check out the Patreon page, there's a link in the description of this video you can click. That'll take you to the Patreon page. You can have a look around. I will be streaming on live on YouTube tomorrow as well for the primetime games. But I've mentioned this a couple of times this week. This weekend is homecoming for both of my kids in high school. And there's a homecoming dance tomorrow night, Saturday night. And I've got to do some fatherly duties in regards to that. I've got to do some running around and some chauffeuring around and some dropping off and picking up and picture taking and things like that. So I probably will not be able to start tomorrow night's YouTube stream right at 7 like I would like to. That's when the Georgia game comes on. And then you've, of course, got Notre Dame, Ohio State coming up at 7:30. I probably won't be back home till around 8. So I don't know exactly what time tomorrow night's primetime stream on YouTube will start, but it'll start as soon as I get back home. So just turn the notifications on and you'll be notified when I go live tomorrow night. But tonight, 7 o'clock, we'll live stream the Friday night games. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., the college football kickoff show from 9 to 11 a.m. Tomorrow on noon, the Patreon stream for all the noon games. And tomorrow around 8 o'clock, a YouTube stream for all tomorrow night's primetime games. All right, appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.